What is up YouTube? Welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. For this issue we're going to be painting the Banshee from issue 10 of Mortal Realms magazine. You can check the review for that up in the corner here. I'll put a card up there. So the colour scheme we're going for this one today is what I am going to class as the spiritual part of it, the ghostly part down here. I'm going to do in ethereal blue and sort of very pale blue ghostly colours, along with her skin on her arms and her neck and her face. As you can see, I haven't got her right arm or head or the outer parts of her dress attached yet. The reason being is with those attached it makes this area very difficult to get to, so I've got them as separate pieces that I'll be painting up separately and then attaching once we are done. What I have done is made sure that all the pieces fit together as a dry fit, just holding them in place. Make sure that they're not forming any gaps or anything like that, so that when I come to gluing them they'll fit together. You'll also notice that the base that came with the issue was a square base on the sprue and a round separate base. That's to update the model to fit with the new Age of Sigmar Warhammer rules in terms of base sizes for movement and unit sizes and things like that. But what I decided to do was cut the edges of the square base off so that I only had the top part that she would attach to with the skull, and I've gone and super glued it in place on the centre of the round base, and then around that I've placed PVA glue all the way around, and then just dipped it into some bird sand and bird grit, a mixture. I think it's about a 3:1 ratio of sand to grit, so 1 part grit, 3 parts sand, and you get some nice sort of large pieces along with the smaller stuff, and then that just blends it up nicely with the base that was already there. What we'll do, we'll start with painting the base to get the majority of that out of the way. That will just be a case of going over with Sandry dust and then washing it down with I think it's Reichland Flesh Shade, no, Seraphim Sapia, sorry, over the top, and then a dry brushing of Death Guard green to give it a bit more of a deathly graveyardy rotten green kind of look. And then a final highlight with some Ushapti bone mixed with that Death Guard green. And then, like I say, the skin and the centre part of her, which I would assume would have been her legs or something, are going to be the ethereal part. Her corset and the outside of her collar part here, we're going to do black, but with some hints of grey in there. The inner part of her corset or head part piece, we're going to do red. The sleeves here, as well as the outer parts of her dress, we're also going to do in red. And then the hair we will do in black, but we will highlight that with blue to make it stand out slightly. And then obviously she's got the dagger that she's holding, which we'll paint in steel colours. So without further ado, let's get started. Right, so first of all we're going to take some Sandry dust and we're going to thin this down in our palette slightly, and just with a cheap old Games Workshop standard starter brush, which is going to slap this all over the base, getting it down in those details. We're not going to worry too much about the sides, as we will paint that differently. So we just want to get this all the way down in there, in between all the gaps. So while I get on with this, if you're following along, painting along, then go ahead and start yours, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so once that's done, sorry, we'll move on to the ghostly part. So for that we're going to use some Ethermatic blue, and we're going to use this straight from the pot. As it is a contrast paint, it won't go too well with the wet palette. So all we're going to do is just take some out of the lid, and then working from the bottom, we're going to pull up the model. Don't worry about getting it on the corset or anything, but we're just going to spread it as thin as we can, getting the majority of it up the top there. So again, just off the bottom, getting it down into those recesses, just making sure that it collects the majority of it at the top. All we're looking to do is stain this white with some of this blue. And you can see how it wants to sit on the flat surfaces, but it doesn't really want to sort of collect on the hard edges. This will take a couple of layers to get right, but what we're aiming for is for the majority of the paint to collect at the top here. Maybe used a bit too much there, so just rinse my brush, and we'll go back in from the bottom and just pull up. And just take some away. You don't want to do this for too long. We'll try and leave it alone once you've settled it, otherwise you end up with tea stains and horrible looking watermarks. If you do, don't worry, you just repaint it and start again, it's not a problem, but obviously nicer if you can do it without having to start again. So I just want a bit more in here and under here. And all I'm doing is keeping the model laying back so that it doesn't flow down. Obviously with this paint it is very thin, and it will want to follow gravity. So if you can give it a little bit of a change of direction just by holding the model flat or upside down, it'll be better. Alright, so I'm just gonna hold this in this position just for a couple of minutes so that has time to dry, and we'll be back in just a bit, guys. Okay, so whilst that's almost dry, we can now take some syrup and sepia, and we'll just put this over the base. So again, we can use this straight from the pot. I'm using a large size 6 round here, just so it soaks up plenty of that ink, and we can just apply this all over. Make sure we get it down in them gaps in the rock. You could do this with a darker wash if you wanted to, something like Nuln Oil. Agrax Earthshade is one that a lot of people use. I happen to be running a little low on that at the minute, so I'm just going with Syrup and Sepia, as I've got a large pot of it, and it gives pretty much the same result. So all over, get it down in there, and then that will have time to dry whilst we work on another area of the model. So while that is drying, we're going to take some Abaddon Black and we're going to thin it down slightly, and we're going to do the corset and the back of the hood there. So again, just getting a nice thin coat or two with this, Just going to go around all of the corset. Obviously try not to get it on our skin at the top there. If you do, don't worry too much, we can go in and retouch it with white. It will add a little bit of shadow around that area anyway. Now you'll notice that on the arm here I've scratched away some of the spray paint, and I've also started to do that on the corset. Sorry, not on the corset, on the ethereal part here. That's so that when it comes to gluing the outer part down, it will have a good bit of plastic to adhere to, rather than spray paint or any kind of paint. The reason I've done that is I find that if you use plastic glue, there's no plastic to bond to. It is just paint and you don't get a good bond. And a lot of people will say, well, just use super glue. But with my experience, the super glue again doesn't really have anything to bond to other than the paint, and the paint can chip and peel away easily, which means if the glue and the next pieces are attached to paint, then that is also going to peel away from the miniature. So what I tend to do, if I spray them whilst on the sprues or anywhere where I'm not fully gluing a piece together, I will usually go in after painting, work out where my joins are going to be, and you know, the pieces are going to connect, and then I'll just scrape away with a hobby knife just a little bit of the paint, not too much, just enough to get a bit of a bond there between the two plastics, because plastic glue literally melts the plastic and forms a strong bond between them. You don't need a huge area to get a decent bond, so just enough to keep them together really. Right, and then over the top of her shoulder here will be black, and this part here is her hair, so that's going to be black as well. Obviously you can tell that I am not doing this true to the colours that come with the model, you know, Games Workshop colours or what comes with the magazine. I wanted this one to be a little bit more standout, and just something a little bit different, so here we are doing this one. Right, so I'm going to go ahead, let that layer dry, and then apply a second one. If you're following along, then go ahead and do the same, and we'll be back in just a bit, guys. Okay, so once that's done, we're now going to take some ceramite white, and we're going to dry brush this along the lower part of the ghostly area here. So all I'm doing, with barely any paint on there, just going backwards and forwards to try and get it a smooth transition. Now with dry brushing you're not going to get it incredibly smooth, but that's fine. We're just looking to apply enough to blend up to make the bottom white and the top with a little bit more colour. All we're looking to do is pick up all the edges and the majority of the flat surface as well. We can leave it a little bit. Now I am using a wet palette with the white on here, and what that's doing is keeping the white just damp enough that it's actually given a quite a smooth blend up, which is nice. If you can get that, then you're on a winning streak. If not, don't worry. Like I say, we're just looking to pale up the bottom. Don't worry if you get it on the stones or the base. But we're just looking to pale up the bottom and get it white, leaving some of that ethermatic blue in those deeper areas. Just giving it a harder application with a bit of pressure down here, just to get rid of some of this harsher blue. Get that white in there. You can see my brush is definitely beat up from a few years of dry brushing here. You'll be able to, it does give a good effect. You see what it's doing here. Again, I'm just working it into the bristles. Picked up a little bit of the Xandri dust there. I don't want that. So just make sure I get my bristles a good dry off. Get some of that pure white. Come down here with it. And then back over. Right, now I'm just going to dampen up the brush slightly, but no more paint has been put on. Now, whilst that paint is still a little bit wet, I'm barely touching here. Dry it off a bit more, and I'm just blending with some of the wet paint that is on the brush. And that's pretty much more water than paint at this point, and all that will do is smooth out the transition slightly. Just basically start with a bit of pressure at the bottom, and as you come further up, barely touching and just picking off areas. So a bit of pressure, and then as I come up, barely clipping the model. You can see I'm going so fast that the paint isn't going to have time to apply properly, and you'll get this smoother blend up the model. There we go. So if you want to go ahead and do yours, and we'll come back in just a bit, and we'll start doing the red areas. Okay, so next we're going to take some Mephiston red, and what we're going to do is apply this first of all to the area down here coming off the arm, and just as it goes onto the corset there. Obviously being careful not to catch the arm there. If you do, we'll just go over it with white and neaten that up, because we don't want any dark red there when we apply the Ethermatic blue for the skin. So just being extra careful again not to get it onto the black, and if we do, we will just go back over it with black. And this is why we are doing the red before we do the Ethermatic on the arm, because it will be extremely difficult to tidy that up. So we'll go with this way first. If we get Ethermatic on the red, we just throw some red over it. But if we get red on Ethermatic, we have to paint the whole area white again, get it to a nice crisp white, and then go back in with the Ethermatic. So a lot more fiddling around than needs to be. So now just doing the inside of the hood here, just going around the neck, along the inside, just where it's about to become the corset in there. And I've borrowed this inspiration from typical Dracula pieces, as that is exactly what this area reminded me of when I first saw it. Right, and while we're here, what we will also do is take the pieces of skirt from the outside or dress, and we're just going to paint the inside of them before we apply them to the model, as we can paint the outside once it's attached, where it will be easier to paint. So just with this piece, this is the piece that goes on the right hand side. So on this side, her left, our right. And as you can see, I'm just doing the inside, and I'm leaving this area of grey plastic is where it will glue to the model. Obviously I've scraped away some of the paint on the model, not as much an area of this, but there's enough there that any glue in this area will attach to the paint, as well as the plastic that is exposed on the miniature, and that will give it a good enough bond that we won't have to worry about it coming apart. Now, you could go ahead and paint the outside if you wanted to whilst holding it like this, but in all honesty it is probably better and easier to paint it once it's on the miniature. So the inside, as long as we get a nice even smooth red on there, that will be enough. We're not going to see too much of it anyway, as it will be in contact with the miniature, apart from a little bit that flares away. And then the same with the other one, holding it by the hairpiece and just painting the inside nice and red. So if you guys that are following along or painting along want to go ahead and do that, we'll be back in a bit. But just before we go, I will say that we also want to leave this flat edge here, as that is what attaches to the flat edge on the other piece. I'll just show you this flat edge along here. They attach together at the back of the miniature, so if you can leave them exposed, then again that's more plastic to bond. So you go ahead with yours, I will finish this, and we will be back in just a moment. Okay, so next up we're going to take some Eshin Grey, and we are going to use a flat dry brush, sorry. I've got one here from the Army Painter. This is their, if we can get it out of the light, this is their small dry brush. And what I'm going to do is take some of that Eshin Grey and just a little bit of the Abaddon Black, just to darken it up ever so slightly. As for this dry brush, I want a little bit of subtlety to it. So just working it into the bristles there, and then taking the majority of it off. And now all I'm going to do is just gently brush this across the corset, being careful not to go onto the thematic. I don't know if this will show up on camera, as it is a very subtle change. I may need to add a little bit more Eshin Grey. Try now. And what we're looking to do with this is essentially cover the entire black area, apart from the deepest recesses, with this grey, so that of course it becomes slightly more grey than black, and the black will be the shadows. Which is why we want it just a little bit subtle, so that it's only really visible under the right light. Alright, now we'll take some of the pure Eshin Grey and do the same thing, but just over these lower areas at the bottom of the corset. The strings in the middle we will paint red, so don't worry too much about them. And just on the top of her lady lumps there. And then just on the back, just under here, and then just along the top of the hood. Then we'll take some Dawnstone, just a very small amount on the dry brush. Mix a little bit of that darker mix into it, just to tone it up a little bit. And then same again, just pick off some of these edges with that Dawnstone, and that will just put some texture and light onto the leather of the corset. Not entirely sure if that is visible on camera. Let's see if we can get the focus in. But when you do it, you will be able to do it until you can see that it's there. Like I say, this isn't supposed to be a stark contrast. We're just doing a little bit of highlight on there with some dry brush. Right, now that that's done, we can go ahead and attach everything to the model except for the hairpiece. So this piece here will be the last piece we attach, as it is going to be in the way of some of our detailing once it's on. So if you want to go ahead and attach your head and the other two pieces, we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so once we have our pieces on like this, we can realise that I made a mistake, and we cannot get to her chest area under here with the Ethermatic blue. It's not too much of a problem. We'll just have to carefully take the blue and a brush and just apply it in there, knowing that it will set into the recesses and do what we need it to do, and then we can apply it over the face and the arms. But before we get to that, we're just going to take the Mephiston red and we're going to paint up the arm here. If you haven't done it already, I did do it as part of the inside, as it was easier to get to at the time. And then we will also do the outside of the dress. So if you guys want to go ahead and get on with painting that, as well as the black area just under here if you haven't done it, and we'll be back in just a bit. Do try to be careful when going over these holes in the dress that you don't get the brush into them and get red onto that blue in there, but do make sure that you do get in them so that we don't get white rings on the inside. So I will be back in just a second. Okay, so once all our red is done, we should have something that looks like this. And now we're going to take our Ethermatic blue, and first of all apply it inside this area here. I find just a nice big blob of it will get it to settle exactly how we want it to without too much worry. And then we're going to just do the arms and the hands on the end there. And what I'm going to do is just pull slightly up against the red just to get a little bit of pooling, and then I've noticed a little bit in my palm there. I just want to get rid of some of that, and then just in there slightly, just dry the brush off, pick it out, as we want the ends to be a little bit paler than the back end here. So again, on this one, same thing, just gently paint it on, and then get a little bit to pull towards the bottom there. And then with the face, not too much on the brush, but enough to fall into all those recesses there. Like so. Alright, so if you want to go ahead and do yours, we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so once our Ethermatic blue is done, whilst it is drying, we'll go ahead and take some Death Guard green, and we're just going to dry brush this over the base. Now we are applying this a little bit liberal. This isn't fully dry brushed, as in it's still got quite a bit of the paint on there, but we're just going over the top. Try not to get it onto the white areas there, but otherwise we do want to pick off the majority of the detail in the stone and this bit in between, in the middle there. If you're using a different base, or you want to go with a different colour scheme for your base, that's totally fine. You can skip this step and move on to the next bit, which will be coming up in just a sec. And if you are following along, then go ahead and do yours, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so next we're going to take some Carroburg Crimson, and we're going to apply this shade to all of our red areas. So again, I'm just using a standard infantry type brush here, and I'm just going to blob it in some of the recesses and then paint it over everything else, making sure that it doesn't pool up too much where I don't want it. So in areas like this is fine, but get it off of the peaks. Unlike a contrast paint, this is slightly thicker, so it will want to cling to peaks and surfaces a lot more, so you do have to be a little bit more careful with how you are applying it. I find go for almost a glaze over the top and then go back in and fill in your recesses. A bit too much there. Pull that down, it's not a problem. So get it all over the arm here. Again, being careful not to get it on the ethermatic. And then the other arm here. And you can see this does dry quite quick, so try not to go back over an area before it's finished drying, and be very careful. I'm just going to try and get the inside here, and just a little bit on the inside edge here, and then in the hood like so. Just get it to pull up in there. Anywhere where you want sort of the super dark area, just let it pull up a little bit more, and you can always go back over once it's dried and just apply a bit more shade to the darker areas if you wish. There we go, so go ahead and do yours, and we shall be back in just a bit. Okay, so once that's had time to dry, we're now going to go back in with some thinned down Mephiston red. We're just going to pick up any flat surfaces and edges and just bring them back to that nice red. The reason we're using thin down is so that if we go over any of the dark areas slightly, it will be more of a gradient and won't be too noticeable. We'll get a smoother blend with it. So if you guys want to go ahead and do that, it will take a few coats, a few layers, as we've shown before with layering and blending. If you haven't seen me explain that before, then go and check some of my other videos, as I do it quite frequently in those. But I'm looking to keep this one fairly short this week. if you would like a detailed, dedicated video for techniques such as glazing and blending and layering, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see what I can do in regards to making one. But if you want to go ahead and get on with yours, we will be back in just a moment. Okay, so next we're going to take some Evil Sun's Scarlet. I'm going to use this for our edge highlights. I'm going to thin it down ever so slightly, and then I'm going to pull the brush back through it, flattening the bristles out so that we get something similar to that, if we can get it thin. And then all we're going to do is carefully pull along any of the edges, along here, anything down here, and then around the bottom half of the holes. If you pull up slightly, you'll get the paint to come just over the edge, which will give you a nice edge highlight. And then we can also thin it down a little bit more and just pick up some of these edges at the top of these folds and stuff on the dress here. So something like down here, around the lip of this fold here. The same with this one here, and then we can come down like so, and then again with this coming down this way. So if you guys want to go ahead and do that on any of the raised edges, and we'll be back in just a moment. Right, and finally for the red highlights, we're just going to take some Wild Rider red, mix a small amount of the Evil Sun Scarlet into it just to take away some of that pink, and thin it down ever so slightly. And then all we're going to do is use this for some very extreme highlights, so just around the bottoms of the holes here. And this one. The edges of the sleeves, as well as the folds and creases in the tops of them. Don't need too much paint on your brush for this, just enough that you can flatten the brush and then pull it along some of those ridges just to get a little bit of highlight. And we'll just go down a couple of these sharper, more exposed ridges like so, and then down the front of the dress just here, and this one here. There we go, and that is our red done. Okay, so next we're going to take some Calidor Sky, and into this we're going to mix some black. And we do want this to be quite dark. Just going to get a little bit more of the Abaddon black there. And this is going to be the highlight layer for our hair. So as you can see, that is very sort of almost towards the grey. It's a cool grey, so it has the hint of blue in there. And then we're just going to pull this back across the hair, leaving the deepest recesses black, but everything else will be this colour. Don't worry here about going over the blade, we will change that once we come to painting it. So all we're looking to do is just put a blue sheen to this hair. So just gonna pick off. We don't have to worry about the underside too much, as the light won't reach there as much. And remember that this area of hair is pretty much covered by the hair that we're going to attach on in just a bit. And again, I'm not too sure how much the camera will pick up of this blue. Hopefully you can see something there. Alright, so once that is done, we can now take our hair piece and glue that in place just over the top, like so. So if you want to go ahead and paint this up black if you haven't already, and then glue it in place, but obviously leave this area of plastic inside and on her head so that this will glue and bond. And we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so now that you've got your hair dried, well, your hair glued on I should say, we're going to take some more of the blue black mix here and just go over the top of all this. So same as we did with the other layer of hair. Just gonna mix some more up here as it's just dried up a little bit. So again, just brush it over the top, picking up all the edges. Don't worry about going down into some of the creases, as we are going to highlight this a little bit. This is just sort of a mid-tone, so we've got the black as our shade, this is our mid-tone, and then we're going to go with a slightly more blue tint for our highlight, and that will get more of a dry brush. So now we're going to take some more of that Calidor Sky, mix it into what we've already got, just to take it a little bit more towards the blue lighter side, and then take some of the excess off, not too much. We do want some paint on there, we're not going for a complete dry brush. And all we're going to do is just come sideways along the ends and just pick off the odd strand here and there. Focus more on the top rather than this underlayer, as the light won't get to it as much, so we're not going to highlight it as much, but we're just looking to put in the odd bit of shine and blue strand. And then we can do the same up here. We can just put across in a line where the light would cause sort of a highlight, and then just pick up some of the edges, clean up some of the where I got it on some of the red there. It doesn't matter too much, I can go back in and touch that up. So the idea basically is just to break up the amount of black that is in the hair, so it doesn't just look like black hair. But there we go, I think that's just about done. Now we can take some silver, and for that we are going to use, if I can find it, there we go, just some iron breaker. And this is just a small amount for the dagger blade there. So carefully apply that to there, like so, and then just the inside area here, like that. Then we can take some Balthazar gold, and this will give us a bit more of a copper gold look, or a brassy gold rather than a bright gold. We don't want anything too bright for this one. And we can do this just on the guard there. Again, this probably would have been easier doing this before attaching the outer layer. So if you're flicking through this before going ahead and doing yours, then learn from my mistake there and paint the dagger before applying the outer hair. But that's fine, got a little bit of paint there, but I can touch that up with a little bit of black and that will clean that up nicely. So just go in with some black like so. There we go, a little bit on there. Right, and finally we can take some Ushapti bone, apply a small amount of this to our palette with a little bit of the green from earlier. This is the Death Guard green. Work it down into them bristles, and then just pick off a few edges for highlights on the base. Like I said, if you've already done the base or you have different colour idea, colour scheme, that's fine. I'm just going for a bit more of a sickly pale green effect with this. And then what I'll do is paint the outside edge with Death Guard green to match it all up. Just going to go over the skull here. Right, and then I'm going to take some Eshin Grey. Thin it down slightly and just pick off a few stones that are in here on the centre there. And then pick off a larger one. And the way that we can blend this with the gravel that we put on the outside is just pick off some of the larger stones out here, and this will just blend it all in, or tie it all in together. Alright, Right, so I'm just going to paint this in, and then I will highlight some of the edges with some Dawnstone, and then we will come back and have a look at the finished model. And there we have it, guys, the finished Banshee. Obviously I just need to go around and do the base there around the edge. I'll do that once I've removed it from here. But I hope that was useful to at least some of you. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to hit that thumbs up, and if you're not already subscribed, please do consider subscribing. I'm just shy of halfway to my goal of 100, but with your help spreading the word, hitting that subscribe button, I'm sure I'll make my first 100 soon enough. So that's all from me, guys. Like I say, thanks a lot for joining me, and I shall catch you next week for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. Take it easy, guys.